Have you thought about painting on glass but not sure where to get started? Well, let me give you some of my quick, easy tips that will make it a little bit more successful for you. To begin with, make sure that your glass is nice and clean. I usually just use dish soap and clean it at my sink, rinse it in hot water, and dry it off. If you're in an area where you're not able to have a sink available, a alcohol wipe will also work to remove any residue. Don't put it in your dishwasher though, because your dish soap in your dishwasher does leave a residue on the glass, and that'll prevent the paint from sticking as easily. Then you just need to decide what it is that you want to paint on your glass. I have a little forget-me-not project here that I'm going to show you how to do. So what I've done is I've cut the pattern out and I cut little slits in between the elements so that it'll fit inside of the round glass. I've put tape on the pattern, and because this is a rounded design, it doesn't matter which is up and which is down. And I'll press that tape into the glass so that it'll stay for me. Then the next thing is, no matter what brand of paint you're using to paint with, the most important thing is your brushes. The glass really needs to have super soft brushes in order for the paint to not just wipe right off. You're going to get a much better coverage if you have a very soft hair to your brush. These are my basic shapes that I like to use, and these are my glass art brushes. 2 rounds, 2 liners, 2 flats, and even a rake brush for doing fur and beards and things. So to get started, these brushes are new, so I do want to rinse out the sizing, rinse it in water, wipe it off real well on my paper towel. I'm going to try not to add water into my paint, because if you dilute it too much, it is going to cut the binder that allows the paint to stick onto the glass. Now I can paint right on top. I don't have to do any tracing because I was able to put my design inside, and I want to use a lot of paint. So when I load my brush, I kind of pat the paint into the bristles, but then I'm going to scoop up an extra little amount of paint on the tip. I'm going to also scoop up a little white on the other side, so I've got some of both. And I'm not going to blend it on my palette. I want to be able to see pretty streaks of color. And I'll just paint right on top of each of those petals. As I need to add more, I'll just scoop up some purple on one side, white on the other. And you can see I get a really nice coverage because of the soft bristles or hairs in my brush. So I'm just pulling a couple of strokes. I'm going to go around and do all the petals first. Scoop up lots of paint. Don't wipe that extra paint off on your palette. You want the extra paint and a soft touch. Now I'm ready to go to the next color, so I'll clean the brush, blot it off really well on the paper towel. I'll load some pink, and just choose your favorite colors, and then scoop up a little extra pink on the tip, scoop up some white, and I'm pulling from the outside into the center. Sometimes I can get a couple petals, and sometimes I have to reload with every petal. Lots of paint, soft touch, soft brushes are the key. Now, if I didn't like something that I had on there, I can certainly re-stroke over it again. More paint. Don't be afraid to let the petals overlap from one flower to the next. Turn your design, making it easier. Okay. Then I'm going to go ahead and get the blue ones next. This is Calypso Blue. And I happen to be using the DecoArt gloss enamels for what I'm painting on here. And then this does get baked on in your oven. I let it dry for at least overnight and then put it in a cold oven. Turn the oven to 325, set it for about 40 minutes, shut the oven off, and let it stay in the oven until the oven is cold again. So this is just a quick little project that can be done. You could also do it on a little glass ornament. I've got one more blue. There again, I'm not afraid to overlap onto the other flowers. Now, while I've got that blue still in my brush, I'm just constantly picking up more paint. And I'm going to go ahead and do all of the little buds. Now, if I happen to make a mistake, I can actually just wipe it off and try it again. Until you've baked this on, it's not permanent. Get all my blue buds. Then I'll go back and I'll get the pink buds. Lots of paint, scoop up a little extra on the tip. Get a little white on there too. Fill in the little pink buds. Okay, and then I'll do the leaves next. And the leaves can be any colors that you want. If you want just a plain green, that's fine, but I'm going to load it with this avocado first. And then I'm going to scoop up a little bit of yellow and a little bit of white on there too, just so I get a variety. This time I pull from the base of the leaf to the tip, and I'm just going to kind of drag out that little tip. A little more paint. Don't worry about following the design exact. Give the little brush a little twist to get that tip. Try not to re-stroke too often within the same area. Just get in and get out. Sometimes I have all the basic design filled in now, so I'm actually going to take my pattern out because it's going to help me to see the lines and if I needed to do any touch-ups anywhere. Okay, now I'm going to switch to my liner brush, and I'll wet it, but I'll wipe all the moisture out on the paper towel. And I want to use a lot of paint. It's not too often I would thin that with any water, even though I'm doing lines, because I want the paint to be a little bit thicker as I do my line work so that it really does adhere to the glass better. Very light touch, just with the tip. You do have to reload often, and I'm just pulling all my little lines in towards the center. I'll add a little scoop at the bottom for a bud cup. And I'm just using the avocado color straight this time. I could mix it with color if I wanted. Get all the lines. Just anywhere you looks like there's an empty spot to go ahead and pull a stem. Then in the center of the flower, I'm going to add a black center. Now, because I didn't need very much of the black, I'm just going to use what's in the cap. And I'll go back to my little round brush and scoop up some black and just make a black circle. And this cleans up all the bottom edges of your petals. Okay, and let that dry a little bit. Clean the brush. Okay, in between each of the petals, I've got a white line, so I'll use the liner, the script. and just add a white line. Light touch. If you press down, you're going to get a great big fat line. So very light touch, barely touching every petal. Can have a little white line in between. And if your brush gets too much paint on it, feel free to stop and rinse it and reload at any time. In between each of those, I have a yellow dot. Now when you're doing the dots, I'm going to use the liner brush, and what I do is I swirl it and pick up a bead of paint on the tip so that I can just gently set it down. Swirl and pick up a bead of paint. Don't wipe it off. And that'll give you a nice round dot. And you have to reload often. Sometimes you have to reload after every dot. Sometimes I can get two little yellow dots in between each. And then in the middle of the black, and it's best if you can wait for this to dry a little longer, but I'm going to be real careful, and I'm going to use the little liner brush in a circle, scoop up, and I'm just going to set a green dot in the middle of the black, scoop up. Try not to disturb the wet paint. Okay. Rinse the brush. Okay, the only other thing I would add on here are some little dots in the background, but I want to show you how you do some correcting also. I have a couple of tools that I call my cleanup and stippling tools, and if your paint is already dry, if you'll take a look, you'll see I've got a little nub hanging off of this leaf, and this paint is already setting up, so I've got a little micro stylus that I use to just scratch off that little excess paint and clean up the edge. And I can do that, and it's like it'll just cut right through and then just pick off the extra paint. Now, if the paint was still wet, in fact, let me just add one more little leaf so I can show you if it was wet. Let's get some more green. Okay, let's add another little leaf right here. Okay, let's say I didn't like the shape of this leaf that I just put on here. While it's still wet, I'm going to take the little foam tip. I wet it, blot the extra off, and then I can use that to just reshape the edge of my leaf. Clean it up or remove any excess that I don't want on there. But once it's dry, use the micro stylus. Okay, then the little dots in between, I could use the micro stylus to add little white dots, but for me that's just a little too small. So I do like to use the tip of the liner brush and scoop up a little bead of paint, and I'm just going to randomly add little airy white dots in between the design, and that helps to finish it off. Don't be afraid to put some on top of, an area if you've got a big gap somewhere, or you have a leaf you're not real happy with. Not a problem adding a few little dots onto it. It'll camouflage the imperfections. And this just helps make it look a little bit more lacy. Reload often, scooping up on the tip. And just as many as you want, and you'll see that we have a fun little glass in a very short period of time. Another little addition to painting on glass that I'd like to share with you is doing a little bit more of a frosted look around the bottom of a glass, and it looks more like it's been etched. And this is using a glossy enamel that's a white frost. But the way that I put it on is, and I'll just show you on a little ornament here, is with this little foam brush. It puts it on a little bit more even than if you're trying to use a makeup sponge or a stippler brush. So I'm going to squeeze a little bit of the frost enamel out, and I put the sponge in it, and I kind of get the extra off on the palette, and then I'm just going to gently tap that on and create a frosted look. Now normally what I do is I will do this step first when I'm working on a design, but I do put the pattern in so I stay a little bit away from where the pattern is. The paint can go on top of this, so if you have a little edge of a leaf or a flower that's overlapping, not a problem. A lot of times I do like to do 2 coats, so I let it dry in between. See if you can kind of see the little frost. It gives it a little bit more of an elegant look. So that's kind of a fun little addition. One other thing that I like to do is on the bottom of glasses, I like to put a color on the very bottom. And to do that, let's see, I think I'll use the pink. I squeeze about the size of a dime right in the middle of the glass. And then I'm going to use the great big fluffy flat brush. Now this I don't want to be wet, so I want to make sure this is nice and dry when I go to use it. And I'm going to gently pull that paint out and around the glass. Cover that. It's nice and thick, and I don't want to play in it too much. It's not going to show the ridges underneath. It'll look nice and smooth on top, so if you have just a little bit of a ridge underneath, it's not going to matter. Okay, and then I better quit playing in it. Now, when I go to turn that over, it looks like the color is coming up into the stem a little bit, so it's a nice little fun way to finish off your glass. Leave that upside down, bake it in your oven, 325 degrees for 40 minutes, shut the oven off, wait till the oven is cold, and then take it out and enjoy your glass. Now that you know the basics of getting started with the glass painting, let me show you the next step in adding some shadows and highlights to your design. I've got a drawing of a hydrangea that I've taped inside of my glass, and I'm going to start with just the liner brush and some light buttermilk, and I'm going to fill in each of the petals with just strokes of this color. I want to see the little bit of a ridge with each stroke, because then it makes it look like there's vein lines happening in each of the petals. So lots of paint. I'm scooping up the color. I'm not adding any water to it at this point. And I just want to go through and get each of the petals filled in. I pull from the outer edge in towards the center. Lots of paint, reload often. And I'm not worried if I don't stay inside the lines just exactly as the pattern. Anything close is going to be fine. And then I'll rinse my brush and let those set up just a little bit. And I can go to my leaves and start filling those in next. On the leaves, I could either use this same brush or I could switch to a little bit bigger brush. But I like to see the little bit of ridges because it does look like vein lines. So I'm going to use some foliage green, and I'm going to start on the outer tip, and I'm going to pull my brush strokes in towards the center vein. I want it to have a little bit of a ruffly edge, and follow through with your brush strokes all the way from the outer edge in towards the center vein, and then you just kind of tuck in extra color in the empty spaces. But anytime you can pull a continuous line, that's better. Lots of paint. You can see I'm not wiping any of it off. I'm scooping up lots on that tip so I get a very good coverage. I'm going to do the same thing for each of the other leaves. Inside the center of each of my little clusters of flower petals, there's going to be a little green dot, but that's going to help clean up all the center, so I'm going to wait to do that. If you can let your petals dry a little bit before you do this next step, it is for the best. It'll go a little bit easier. Now what I want to do is I want to start getting some lighter and darker edges on the petals. This acts a little different than your normal acrylic paint, so when you're doing shadows and highlights, it's actually easier to do them with little lines. So if I'm adding like some little shadows or darker edges, I'm going to outline that edge with my color first, and then I'm going to pull in little individual lines from that edge and try to make each of the lines a little bit different length. Kind of skip around with the color. You want a variety of color throughout all the petals, so I'm going to pick a few of them to do the lighter, and then I'll pick a few of them to do some darker color as well. Just pulling in from that outer edge, just a very light touch. I usually try to do this without adding any water to it. Once in a while I might have to add a little bit of water just to loosen up the paint, but right now, fresh and creamy right from the bottle, I'm not needing to add anything to it. So I'm just going to go ahead and do all these little baby pink edges first. And I think I'll just kind of get on this one side. I want to get a variety of color going throughout here, so let's go ahead and start with the next color. Rinse my brush, wipe it off on the towel, then I'll go with a little bit darker pink. And I'll get a few edges with that. Lots of paint though. Just a light touch now. And pull in. Barely drag that little tip so you get fine lines. Okay, so I've got a variety of the two different shades of pink going on in there, and I'm actually going to take my pattern out now so that I can see as I'm working if I need to fill in any little empty gaps or holes. I actually want to get a little bit of the green in some of the petals as well. And if I didn't like the pink areas, any of them, if I needed to change them, I could certainly go back and pull the light buttermilk from the center of the flower back into the petals to help break it up a little bit. Get a little bit of that foliage green, just kind of a little bit here and there just to give it a little bit of interest. And then I think I'll leave that alone. I want a few of the petals just a little bit darker, so now I'm going to use some of the Napa red. This time I am going to thin it a little bit because I'm going on top of another color. If I thin it a little bit, I've already got the main color sticking to the glass. So this is actually going to go on top of what I've already got, so I can thin it a little bit more then. And I just want to deepen a few of the petal edges here and there just to get a little bit more variety of color going on. And I'm just kind of skipping around randomly picking the petals that I want to deepen. Just gives it a little bit more interest. And I'll just leave that for now. I can always come back and add more if I get more of this done and I decide I need a little something extra here and there. I sure can do that. Okay, then the petals that are in the clusters have a green in the middle. Actually, I think I'll start with the darker green first. I'm going to put both greens in there. And I just want to make a big round circle. So I'm going to look for all the ones that look like they have a cluster that I can see into the center. Lots of paint, and I'm just using the tip. Some of the petals are overlapping others, so you can't always see the entire center. You'll just maybe see little bits of it here and there. Let's see, maybe we'll put one here. Okay, then in the middle of those, I want to put the lighter green. And I'm going to try not to push down because it's still wet. And so scoop up, so I have a bead of paint, and add a smaller dot in the middle of the darker one. And then I'm going to add some light buttermilk in there too. And I'm going to do tinier dots, and it could be 1, 2, or 3 dots, just to help break that up a little bit. Okay, then I'm going to do my leaves, and there again, because it's not very easy to do shading and highlighting like you would normally with acrylics, I am going to do it with little lines. So from some of the edges, I'm going to pull some lighter color. Now I can either use the light buttermilk all by itself, or I can mix light buttermilk and the foliage green, which I base coated them with to begin with, about half and half. And then I'll pull, let's go ahead and get a center vein line in there so I remember where the center is. And then I'm just going to pull little lines coming in, and if I want to outline the outer edge first, I can do that just like I did with the flowers. And then pull in the direction that you pulled your brush strokes to begin with. Just little lines. And then on the other side, I'm going to pull from the center out. So one side I have it on the edge, the other side I have it coming from the center vein. And I'll do that to each of the leaves. Next I want to add some darker lines. So I'll rinse the brush and use a darker green like avocado. And I'm going to come along the other side of the vein. So my vein line has light on one side, dark on the other. And I can, depending on how much darkness I want in this, I can either just do one side of each leaf, or I can do the opposite where the vein line is, just like I did for the highlights. Sometimes I'll just get it more on the tips or more on the base of the leaf. You can mix it up a little bit and make it a little more interesting. Just want to make sure all the little lines are different lengths. And I don't want to lose that original color in the middle there. If I do, I would just come back with some of my, in fact, let me show you that. I would just come back with some of my original color that I filled in the leaves, and I would go right in the middle to help separate. Or if I got too much dark, I could, pull a little bit into it and camouflage that a little bit better. So you can kind of play back and forth with the color, which is nice. If you have a chance to let the base coat color dry before you do this, it really does make it go a lot easier. So usually what I would do is I would do a couple different glasses at the same time, and if you do it more of a production line, that way by the time you get the base coat on both glasses, then it's pretty much ready for the shading and highlight lines. Okay, and I pulled the highlight color on one side of the stem. I'm going to do the dark on the other side. And then just continue the same thing on the last two leaves. And there you have a little hydrangea flower on a glass. There again, this would be fun to add the frost going around it, or adding little dots here and there. That always just kind of lightens it up and makes it airy. So let's maybe take a little bit of the light buttermilk, and remember, scoop up a bead of paint on the tip and just barely touch. It's okay to overlap some onto the leaves as well. But I hope I've encouraged you to give painting on glass a try. You just really have to remember it's a lot of paint. Kind of stay out of the water if you can. Reload often. Soft brushes make a huge difference. And try not to push down when you're making your strokes on the glass. You want to have a very light touch. And if I didn't like this, I could take this whole thing to the sink and wash it off. Okay, then remember this needs to dry at least 24 hours. And you put it in the oven, cold, and you can put it on a cookie sheet. Turn the oven to 325, bake it for about 40 minutes, shut the oven off, and then let it stay in there until the oven is cold. And I always do recommend that you hand wash because you just never know what your water or detergent will do in the different areas. So I hope you'll be encouraged to give painting on glass a try, and I know you're going to love it and be hooked just like I was. Have fun painting.